Thank you, everyone, for attending our lunchtime Charleston session. For 25 years or so, I spent most of my time working with approval plans. So I know all about what they used to be. But today, our three panelists will talk about what their approval plans are today. So you will hear from Trish Chatterley of the University of Alberta, Trish, from Stephen Bosch of the University of Arizona, and Grace Mary Smulowitz from Rutgers University. I'd like to thank Trish, Steve, and Grace Mary for taking part in today's panel. I have a brief introduction, they'll each present, and we'll take your questions at the end. I think that generally works better. So setting up approval plans was hard work in my day. I don't do it anymore, but I used to, like I said, for a long time. But it wasn't especially difficult work. Books or slips is a question I must have asked 50,000 times to I don't know how many selectors over those years as I went from library to library. I know some of you in the audience have had that same experience. Those were the two choices. We could ship you a book on approval, or you could look at a notification slip for a book, and exclude was the third choice. Those are the only outcomes that were possible. That was it. Then the world got more complicated. This is a flow chart showing what profiles do for the University of Alberta today at ProQuest. Books or slips would hardly cover it. All the ground I used to go through still needs to be covered: subjects, publishers, non-subject parameters, and so forth. But now format, platform, and license type need to be manipulated too, and wait times for the preferences within those categories. You could think of approval plans as a kind of sieve in my day. They would filter out certain books and let others drop through. Today, it's more like hydraulic engineering, is a better metaphor, where we construct a series of locks and sluices and holding ponds to direct the flood of print books and ebooks into the right channels. Something like this. It's still hard work, but much more complex than it once was. Here is one way to look at the three quote-unquote approval plans that you'll hear about from Trish, Steve, and Grace Mary. This chart shows the outcomes for these three libraries last month, October, on the profiles they have in place with ProQuest. Again, in my heyday, the choices, the only outputs or outcomes were book or slip. That's it. The first and third columns on this chart from activity at these three libraries for October are all that's left of what was possible in my day. The print approval books, far left, and then two columns over to the right, print approval slips. But today we also have, moving left to right, an online holding or review shelf for print books, usually waiting for the preferred ebook format. Then DDA records for print books, which is a new profile outcome of growing interest among libraries. Ebook approval activations, which are just like print shipments. An online holding or review shelf for ebooks, usually waiting for the preferred platform or license. And then finally, ebook DDA records, a profile outcome that has become, of course, widespread among academic libraries. So profiles fuel all of these outcomes, and profiles have gone well beyond the traditional outcomes of approval plans of send me a book or send me a slip. I'll just say a few things about this slide before I turn it over to our panelists. One, it shows how differently these three libraries approach collection development for new books. You can see hardly any pattern at all. I probably could find patterns, but I'm more struck by the differences among Alberta, Arizona, and Rutgers than I am the similarities. In the past, everyone's approval plan profile was different in its details, but the structure was mostly the same for everyone. No longer true, as you can see, and as you'll hear, I'm sure. I think the slide also illustrates, while this has played out somewhat differently at these three places, the decline of library book selection and the rise of demand-driven approaches. And finally, when a library says they have an approval plan, quote unquote, this slide shows that they might mean something very different from what a librarian may have meant years ago when they said that. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Trish.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to the session today. I was asked to join this panel because at the University of Alberta Libraries in 2014, we completely restructured how we were purchasing our monographs. We didn't have any approval plans to any great extent prior to that, and so we instituted quite a big change. If you attended the Charleston conference last year, Denise Koufagianakis from the U of A did present on our new model. So just a little bit about the University of Alberta. We're located in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We have about 37,000 students at the institution and about 9,000 faculty and staff. We're a large library system. We're a member of ARL and the Canadian equivalent, CARL. We have 6 subject libraries on our main campus, and then 2 off-site campuses. One is about an hour and a half outside of Edmonton, in a place called Camrose, and then our other one is Bibliothèque Saint-Jean, which has a focus on French language, particularly French Canadian material. About 8.7 million print volumes in our collection and 1.3 million ebooks. Our budget in Canadian dollars is 26 million, and about 4 million of those are devoted to monograph acquisitions, and those are the one-time ebook acquisitions. We have some frontless packages that come out of the subscriptions budget because they're annual expenditures. So prior to our big change, we had central funding of some of those large frontless packages that I was mentioning. They do form a large proportion of the ebooks we purchase. We in 2014, moved to an e-preferred collections policy for monographs, so we do buy ebooks wherever possible. We'd had a few demand-driven acquisitions, pilot programs, but never anything ongoing. So we built that into our new approval plan going forward. And otherwise, we had some subject-specific database or front lists that were coming out of the different unit budgets. We had a small number of print materials coming on approval. Most of the books we were purchasing, it was done through title by title selection by the subject librarians in the various libraries. So we were using ProQuest Coots, the Oasis platform, we were using YBP's Gobi system, Harasovitz, a number of different vendors. And so as you might imagine, this was quite a time-consuming process for the liaison librarians. Because we didn't have any approval plan to speak of. So our change was largely originated out of a need to reduce staff time for collections and free it up for things like research data management or bibliometrics and other new roles that they were trying to adopt. So title by title selection is no longer a part of our subject librarians' responsibilities. We centralized monograph acquisitions. So this is kind of how our new library model was structured. We were still buying the publisher ebook packages, and the large interdisciplinary ones at that time were coming out of the central budget, so there had been a lot of centralization of a lot of purchases, which made sense to kind of pull things together. Well, we're going to run out of battery power on the laptop. So we then formed our approval plans that formed the basis of the next 3 components of this flow diagram here. And then lastly, we moved to firm orders. So looking at how the approval plan was shaped, a lot of subject profiles and various things. If a book matched on the profile, it would be sent to the demand-driven acquisition plan first, if at all possible, allowed by the publishers. And that came out of our central budget at that time. Then, if it wasn't available for DDA, but it was available in ebook, we would get the ebook as an e-preferred library. And if it wasn't available in ebook format, it would go to a wait shelf. So there were a large number of titles, as Bob showed on his little spreadsheet there, that showed that they were in a waiting period. So for about 56 days, we wait until an ebook is available, and if not, then the print will ship. And those last two at that time came out of the subject library budget. Our most recent change happened earlier this year in April. We have done away with all of the subject library budgets. We now have 2 fund codes for the entire library system, one for subscription purchases and one for one-time purchases, whether it's an individual title or a large, primary source collection. And I should say that in our approval plan, we don't get any slips whatsoever. Liaison librarians don't review any of those titles at all. Some of them did show as being generated on our plans, and it's actually the ProQuest Coots staff that monitor those for us, because we do have some exceptions built into our plan, such as for our library that's located in Camrose. We allow duplication of print titles to be sent to main campus and the off-site campus just for turnaround times, but we don't need to allow duplication of ebooks because they have access to all of the ebooks purchased on main campus. So coming back to the flow diagram that Bob was showing, this is just how things get filtered in along the various pathways to the DDA if it's not available to ebook, and which platform it is. We do have a hierarchy. We prefer eBook Central books over EBSCO and My iLibrary, which is going by the wayside. And then we also have preferred models. So we would buy on the concurrent access model if available first, then SUPO, and then multi-user options. So as I mentioned, the University of Alberta is quite a large institution. We cover a lot of different disciplines, from agriculture to arts to medicine to engineering, you name it, we have it essentially. And so our approval plans do cover a wide range of subject areas, and we have about 58 separate little profiles as part of our approval plan. Some of the subject ones are just have slight modifications for geographic area, but some of them are cross-disciplinary. Such as for our, this top one here is our U Alberta Authors Plan. So we want to ensure we get a copy of every book published by a U of A faculty member, and Coots arranges for us to acquire those. We also have a Canadiana plan. We want to ensure we cover Canadian publications a little more comprehensively, so we have some more liberal criteria built into our approval plan to ensure we capture those. We also have an award winners plan. So for instance, the Governor General's Literary Awards were just announced in Canada, and we have a list of other awards that are monitored as well. So if they haven't already shipped on approval, our Coots profilers will ensure that we get those materials too. So we established these new approval plans in 2014, and they do require modification as time goes on. They aren't static entities, so modifications do have to be implemented. Some modifications may include just changing the subject parameters as new programs are introduced at the institution, or new faculty members come on board and they have niche areas that you've never collected in before. Publisher rules might need to be changed, so as we have adopted new front list purchases directly from publishers, we will exclude those publishers on our approval plan to make sure we don't duplicate. Non-subject parameter revisions as necessary, and then we've also changed, fiddled with some of the price maximum non-subject parameters in our plans. So just to look a little bit at how this has impacted our pricing or our expenditures. This is a cost analysis for the first 3 years of our purchases through ProQuest Coots specifically, and this is data provided by ProQuest. So in the first year, 6% of our purchases were on the DDA plan. That has increased in the last year up to 12% of our purchases overall. That's expected as the number of records available in our catalog for DDA has increased. We see that the number of ebooks is increasing. We've gone from 866 e-approval books up to 3,213. Going backwards, sorry. The number of firm orders overall, down at the bottom there, has decreased, which we're happy to see. One of the reasons for expanding our approval plans was to eliminate some of the staff time that was devoted to collection development. So the number of firm orders is going down, and those are placed by a monograph acquisitions team that we instituted in our collections unit. So we have 3 academic or non-academic staff members who process any requests that come in from faculty or library staff, and they'll find them either through Coots or various other vendors. The spending, if you look at the bottom, it did increase our grand total in the second year. It's a little bit misleading because we're looking at this in Canadian dollars. So last year the value of the Canadian dollar was worse than it is at present. So that's why you see quite a big jump there, and it came down in the third year. But it is also related to just buying more titles overall as well. What I haven't shown here is the impact on our expenditures of moving to this plan in the first place. And with the implementation of the DDA plan, it did reduce our expenditures by about $800,000 Canadian. So with any approval plan, there are, of course, some challenges. One is preventing duplication of purchases, and we have tried to build in elements that will prevent that from happening. We do load our holdings with OASIS so that if they see we have an item in our collection already, they won't ship that material on our approval plan. For instance, we have a textbook acquisitions program where we buy any required textbook from our bookstore and get it on the shelves as soon as we can. And so we're trying to eliminate duplication there through the holdings. Part of it too with our frontless packages, we do block those publishers, but we do have subscription packages to ebooks as well. And so timing of MARC record loads will influence our holdings in ProQuest. We do have to keep on top of that. Ensuring we're being responsive to needs, such as with new programs that are instituted or new faculty members. Because acquisitions is now centralized at the university, we do rely heavily on the subject librarians to keep us informed of any program changes that are implemented. Assessment to determine how much is enough. We have moved to these extensive approval plans. It's sort of common knowledge that in a lot of cases with subject librarian purchasing, vast majorities of our collections never circulated. So we're looking to do some assessment now. We haven't actually looked at circulation of items that came on approval versus librarian curated collections. So that's something we're going to look into doing in the future. One of our other challenges is just thinking about how our e-preferred policy is affecting our print resource sharing agreements with our local consortium. We have turned, even though we're the largest library in our local consortium, we have turned into a net borrower because we just have so much less print that's available for other people to use. So I think that brings me to the end of my slides. I will turn it over to Stephen, who will be presenting next.
I'm going to take a slightly different approach, and basically what I'm going to do is talk about how approval plans have morphed at the University of Arizona and what they've morphed into, and what the drivers were for those changes. Basically, in the heyday of approval plans, 30 years or so ago, the largest aggregation of information would be found in your local research library. We now live in an era where information is much more abundant, but at that time, building local collections to meet research and educational needs was a great strategy. And at that time, buying books to build a collection was the best strategy for supplying users information needs. Since, of course, at that period of time, books would go out of print pretty quickly. Approval plans were great tools for supplying books. They allowed you to build a core collection with a minimum of effort and a fairly cost-effective means while still having control over the collection through managing your profile and through managing your slips and rejecting things that weren't appropriate for the collection. So at that time, approval plans were really powerful tools. During that time, the University of Arizona acquired close to 3/4 of our books through approval plans and other blanket orders. So, what's changed? Why do we need different strategies for supplying books? And basically, there are three major drivers out there. And the shift to digital, distribution of information, price inflation, and budget stagflation have forced huge changes in the academic information marketplace. Essentially, we now live in a world where information is abundant. Digital information is there all the time. Networked online information is everywhere all the time. Our users expect to be able to go online, get to stuff immediately. So consequently, we have moved from an era where research information was essentially a scarce commodity. You would have to travel to a research library to get it, to an environment where research information is around us all the time, everywhere. During that time, we have seen some really major changes in the supply chain. So we're living in a radically different era. Books no longer become scarce soon after publication due to digital publishing, distribution, and print-on-demand services. Some book chapters can be acquired without buying the whole book. So there's all kinds of different players now in the supply of monographic or long-form content to people. And these are just a few of the obvious examples of what's going on. But basically, the entire distribution of monographic materials has shifted with the changes in the publishing stream. And a couple of other major players have been inflation and stagnant budgets. Those have really forced changes in the environment from publishers, vendors, and libraries. Nobody can do business the way that they did 25, 30 years ago. So consequently, we have had to find new ways to do work because of the fact that budgets have tightened up considerably. Don't want to belabor the point. We all know about serials inflation and the impact of serials inflation on the book budgets. We all know that it's been going up 6% a year forever, and that has caused some real budget pressures. But one thing that a lot of people don't pay attention to is the fact that prices of books, both print and e, are going up considerably during the same period of time. Now, since 2012, if you look at the chart, it looks like the prices of books have scaled back. But this is more due to changes in the industry and the pricing models that are being used for ebooks, as opposed to books are getting cheaper. Essentially, 5 years ago, when you bought a single user ebook, frequently you were paying 140, 150% of the retail price. Now, in most situations, because of multi-user licenses and a lot of things like that, it's become much more common that the actual price of a single user book is more akin to the actual cost of the print book. So there are some other dynamics going on there. But overall, if you look at what's been going on over the past decade, the prices of books have been going up too. So that also adds in to the budget pressures caused by serial inflation and all those other things. So again, prices are going up. One thing that a lot of people are not aware of is that during that period of time, there was a significant decrease in the budgetary effort that was used in higher education for libraries. So basically over the past 15 years, there has been a 41% drop in the percentage of university budgets in higher education as a whole that have been going into libraries. So during this period of time, you can imagine what the increase in serious inflation, book inflation, and all those other things have done to a budget. And at the end of it, there has been a 41% decrease in effort throughout higher education for libraries. So, caught between the rock and the hard place. Budgets are stagnant and prices are going up. Another thing that has really changed is metrics. Over the past several years, there has really been a shift away from some pretty standard metrics like ARL uses to measure libraries. So it's now expected that libraries are going to demonstrate more along the lines of value as opposed to, we've got 10 million volumes in our library, we're a good library. So provosts now really expect libraries to demonstrate that value. The traditional measures, staff, expenditures, numbers of volumes don't tell the story anymore. Metrics that describe what users are actually doing, what is used, cited, blogged, tweeted, are now much more critical. So consequently, we've moved from a place where some fairly static things like the number of things you got and those types of things have been supplanted by more impactful things about what are our users actually doing. And even more important, moving into the future, there's going to be a shift towards actually aligning the value of the library to the actual impact of information resources to the educational and research mission of the university. You got to be able to show why use of your materials led to better educational outcomes or better research outcomes. So it's not so much what you got, it's how it's being used and how that actually benefits the university overall. So bottom line, we've moved into an area where content really must meet the current educational and research needs in a cost-effective manner. Okay, given the changes in this environment, what did we do to kind of move ourselves into a place where we could be as effective as possible bringing information resources to our users? So what we did is, instead of traditional firm order and approval plans, we have become reliant upon DDA and EBA plans. We use an awful lot of subscription products. We have purchased large publisher direct packages. We have very minimal blanket and approval plans, and these are mostly in foreign language areas where different modes of acquiring things aren't there yet, and a very, very small amount of title by title selection. And that's done by faculty, not library selectors. So return on investment is extremely important. And two things have had a great impact at the U of A, and that has really been the shift to digital content and DDA. This kind of shows the real impact of the shift to digital at the University of Arizona Libraries. If you look at our entire print collection and the entire use, and yes, this use includes reshelving statistics, it's just not basic circ. You can see that just 4 of our ebook collections now really surpasses all of the use of our print collections. So we have seen a significant shift in user behavior towards, if it's print, they use it as the last resort, and there's a distinct desire for use of the digital materials. We all know that users bitch and moan about having to use ebooks because there are problems with the platforms. They don't like the DRM, they don't like this, that, and the other. But when you go back and you look at the actual use data, you see that as much as they bitch and moan about it, they use the stuff heavily. So it may not be a perfect world, but boy, they're certainly making the best of it. If you want to look at things like the overall cost per use of e-resources versus print resources, our average cost per use for e-materials is about 80 cents. I didn't put the number here because it's always hard to calculate, but if you just work with a very basic, what we spent on print versus the circulation in the year, it comes up to about $17. If you want to include the overall costs of buying and shelving the print over a long period of time, that cost per use becomes astronomical. So, what do we do with the DDA, EBA programs? The DDA and EBA programs are used as a primary means of acquiring ebooks and print books. Basically, we have plans in place with many different suppliers. We use all of the major aggregators. We have EBA plans with publishers. So consequently, we have found that it is fairly cost effective to expose a lot of content to our users and then actually buy the stuff that rises to the top through use. The good thing about it is that this actually does allow us to curate the materials. It's not like we just open up the floodgates and expose content to everybody all the time. We do have profiles that we manage that are in place that drive the content that we expose to people. And then the things that we only are used and used significantly become permanent purchases for the collections. The numbers at the bottom here are comparisons of what our approval plan used to provide and the amount of circulation versus what we're seeing on the print side through our PDA programs. So the last year that we had an approval plan in place, we bought about 12,000 books, and about half of those circulated in 4 to 10 years. And with what we're doing with the PDA programs, so far we bought about 6,000 books, and those books have now circulated over 40,000 times. So there's a completely different dynamic in use for materials and DDA programs versus the standard approval plans. Another approach we use are subscriptions. And this is, again, a fairly high return on investment area. Things like the academic program from eBrary, the ebook subscription product from EBSCO, Safari, Novel, a lot of things like that. Those are really good ways to provide an awful lot of information to people at a fairly reasonable cost. And there is a huge difference and variance in the actual use of these materials, and that's mainly because of the DRM put on the products by the suppliers. If you want to look at something like Safari, people get very frustrated because of the fact that there's a heavy DRM and there's very little you can do with it. And then there's other places like the other subscription products where there's actually very generous use. So there's an awful lot of differences there. And again, cost varies quite a bit. From about 9 cents for Safari up to about 80 cents for subscribed book series. Another major approach is publisher direct. I think everybody does this. The publisher comes to you with a sweet offer for buying everything, and if the price is right, that's a good way to go. One of the good things about that is that, generally speaking, you have low processing costs, and overall your cost per item is pretty low if the price is right. In some situations, as much as we think that when we go to Oxford University Press and we think that we're buying all of Oxford University Press stuff, it really turns out at the end of the day, you're not really getting absolutely everything because they haven't digitized it, just the way things are. And generally speaking, publishers are very generous with DRM. So it benefits them to see a lot of use, and consequently they're much better able to control that aspect of the business. And generally speaking, they're pretty good about delivering the content in a fairly timely manner. So overall, the remainder of our book purchasing is very, very, very modest. We have an approval plan for children's literature. It's really based upon awards and probably produces less than 50 titles a year. UA authors are supplied, small press, and foreign language. We do have a very limited approval plan, and it's really based upon publisher. And the way that we set it up was based upon historical figures. If the publisher's content circulated at over 90%, we actually did create an approval plan to gather that information. Now, that list of 10 publishers has now shrunk because we, through publisher purchasing, have knocked off 4 of the 10 publishers. So it's a very, very limited approval plan. And everything is fleshed out by title selection, which is, again, nearly all driven by faculty. So in summary, changes in the environment force changes in the book buying programs. Strategies that support high levels of access to content and result in high return on investment, DDA, subs, etc., are now core. Buying programs without high ROI, title by title approval plans, are no longer core. Strategies that we use do fully integrate print and electronic books, since we live in a hybrid world, and in the long term it will be necessary to build cooperative approaches to comprehensively acquiring and preserving the scholarly record. So if people are all kind of focusing on DDA, EBA, and those types of programs, there is no longer any comprehensive approach to building collections and maintaining collections. So the actual mission of preserving the scholarly record for monographs is probably going to have to be taken over by a consortia. So I was asked to kind of say what's next. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? Artificial intelligence. If you're not paying attention to artificial intelligence, you need to go out there and start looking at things, because it's going to change what we do dramatically. If we thought that computer-driven profiles for approval plans are cool, just wait and see what happens with AI. AI systems will be able to do things like not only manage all of that subject information, keyword information, everything that's in the MARC record. They'll be able to go in and grab use. They'll be able to go out and grab citation information. If you open up the LMS and things like that, they'll be able to look and see what people are actually using, how it impacts educational outcomes, and you wrap all that stuff together and it's a brave new world. So pay attention. AI is going to change what we do.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. F5? Is it with control? Oh, okay.
Get rid of that.
Just close it. Yeah. Okay. So, Rutgers, is that it? Okay, so slideshow. Oh, okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to combine a couple of perspectives because I think we've covered a lot, and I think Rutgers falls in a similar category to Arizona, but we also have some differences. And then there's a tremendous commonality among large research institutions and a commonality among small liberal arts colleges. for these things. So I just want to see where I click. I'm sorry.
Use the arrow.
Yeah, okay. So just as a little overview, Rutgers University is a very small liberal arts college with 65,000 students from all 50 states and over 125 countries, more than 48,000 undergraduates and 19,000 graduate students, approximately 10,000 full and part-time faculty with 6,862 full and part-time staff members. There are 28 schools and colleges and 2 medical schools that have recently joined the university, and including New Jersey's only pharmacy school. So it's a very large research institution. There are 100 undergraduate majors and more than 180 graduate programs. So trying to find the best way to meet all of these needs has been more than interesting. Funding constraints. New Jersey's been really in a very difficult financial situation as a state, and consequently, as a university, so has Rutgers. The funding constraints made it difficult for the university to provide appropriate funding to the libraries, and eventually it's led to significant changes in budget distributions. And I'm starting with that because that is really the driving force for a lot of what we're doing. Rutgers adopted a new budget model 2 years ago to promote accountability and to encourage good returns on investments. As Steve has mentioned, that ROI has been a big driving force, and I think it's a big driving force in many institutions right now. The new budget model, called RCM, or Responsibility Centered Management, was implemented in 2015. The objectives of this budget model is to promote financial responsibility at the unit level, and that's quite important. So the responsibility at a unit level works most effectively in an environment of transparency and accountability. RCM is a tool where academic leaders have responsibility for using the system to advance the missions of the university. So I think it speaks to a lot of what Steve was saying, that this is a movement where departments are responsible for what they need, including library needs. And so they get line items, and I'll move to that actually, of costs for library content. And you have to imagine that they're really shocked at what they see, how much everything does cost. They've not had an understanding of this at all, and so it's not a bad thing necessarily. However, they want everything to be reduced so they don't have to pay that much, but they still want a lot of content. It's a new budget accounting model that adds value added is a big criteria. Schools receive invoices, as I said, with line item charges to be paid to the university for library costs. It's been met with a lot of controversy. The medical school at Rutgers, both the 2 medical schools at Rutgers joined the university in 2014, and the new chancellor asked, when he received his, let's say, bill for library services, and you can imagine with medical content, that cost was unbelievable. He was shocked, and he didn't want to pay that kind of money for library services. And on the other hand, he wanted us to buy up to date, and if you know anything about that, it's extremely expensive. Right? So we're balancing all of those issues. Very few administrators had previously understood the expenses associated with the libraries. The libraries became more accountable to the schools for the content purchased to support research. So, as Steve mentioned, the rise in inflation, cereals inflation has really just absorbed a tremendous amount of our budget. New terms required for journal packages related to new launches and transfer titles, and all of these new relatively new concepts have also increased costs. Changes in negotiation models where ebook collections, back files, and other resources are part of the big deal. Offerings are ebooks and book collections, back files are offered with the standard journal package, and they're appealing to, because of their favorable pricing. So we are purchasing a lot of material in that vein, along with negotiated big deal packages. Business acumen and the proof of value became increasingly important to the university administration. No longer was it economically sound to accept all publications within the RUL profile for a broad approval plan with the hope that they would be used. This model had become a luxury. Various purchasing models are now employed to demonstrate due diligence to our administration. Almost 7 years of a flat budget, which is a very long time, is reflected in the percentage of spend per category. So for cereals, the budget that was allocated was about 76% of our budget. 13% was to monographs that were purchased outside of an approval plan, and 4% were attributed to the approval plan. If we look at 2017, 78% of our budget is allocated for cereals. Monographs are 16%, and those would be slip orders and just individual firm orders. And the approval plan at this point, it really was 0.0001%, but it comes out as 0% for approval. The demand is there. The evidence is very significant due to the increase in use. In 2010, ebooks were used at we had 31,478 uses for ebooks. If we just look at 8 months of 2017, we're at 105,577. This is ebooks that are commercially offered and purchased. It's not government documents, ebooks, or any other. This is just statistics based on commercially purchased books. The earlier numbers that are on this slide represent data from approval and firm orders. The latter include data from new models such as PDAs, combined monograph purchasing with journal packages, purchasing monograph collections, subscriptions, and individual firm orders from our monograph vendors. So you can see that we're in a tremendous period of change. This new ecosystem has encouraged Rutgers libraries to think of new methods for acquiring monographs to support undergraduate and graduate research and control the spend. It's become something that we're getting to be very adept at. Rutgers has changed from a broad approval plan to niche plans and has temporarily supplemented our purchases with varied business models while we analyze our budget and determine best methods going forward. A small Rutgers authors publication plan, a medieval publication plan, and an art plan, and a small plan for one of our campuses represent our niche approval plans. We subscribe to ebook packages, and yes, that gets you quite bang for your buck because, first of all, they're unlimited use, and second of all, you have a very broad collection of material, but it's not frontlist material. Purchasing directly from the publishers to eliminate digital rights management is something that we try to do often, but we try to do that with consortial purchases because we're trying to get the best pricing for everything we're buying. And we participate in consortial purchasing, but not with ebook packages, but also through PDAs and DDAs on a consortial level. Purchasing in conjunction with ebook package negotiations as well. Those are the scenarios in which and business models that we're using right now to try to fill the need. We also have non-state funds that are distributed. They're rather small, but they're distributed to all of our selectors for firm order purchasing of materials, and that is a very selective purchasing because the amounts are small, but it covers all the different disciplines. Did I just, oh, no. Okay. some of the issues with these diverse models are that we cannot be as selective as with an approval profile. When you're buying big collections from a subscription model, or you're buying collections from a publisher, it's not as selective. It's like buying journals through the big deal. You're getting some core things, but you're also getting a lot of other things that you may or may not need. But it is what is being offered at the time, and the pricing is right. And we're finding that the majority of the material is being used. Having many business models makes it more difficult to troubleshoot. And I have one example, and it really has happened very, very often. A title may be purchased from an aggregator with set terms of use, and another title purchased from a consortium, but on the same platform as the aggregator. The latter having different terms of use. Tracking these differences is burdensome and difficult to explain, and takes an extensive amount of investigation by our staff. So in other words, if we've bought something that's from a PALC PDA or DDA, and that's a consortial purchase, and it has 7 days of circulation and certain restrictions on the use of that title, if we buy, but it's on an EBSCO platform because that's what the consortium negotiated with, that's one scenario. And we buy a book directly from EBSCO on an EBSCO platform, and we set the terms of use, that's a different scenario. And we have questions about why one book is functioning one way and another book is functioning another way. And we always have to go back to the source and say, how did we really buy this book? It's not necessarily directly from EBSCO. It's from a PALC arrangement, or it's from a Big Ten arrangement. So it's really creating a lot more work on the back end to troubleshoot and to determine, how we can offer this content to our faculty and students. One of the big difficulties that I haven't written here is reserves. Trying to have ebooks on reserves is very difficult, because faculty have requested that they have a particular book for a class of 100, right? And we have that as one user. And so we will upgrade it to 3 users, but that's not going to satisfy their needs. And they've even asked things like, can you buy 22 copies of this book for this class? It's something we're not going to do. So these types of issues are coming up more frequently, and we're trying to determine the best way to handle all of the different demands that are made on us for ebook content. The other thing is that for many collections and subscription models, titles are added and dropped, and determining the status of titles becomes more labor intensive and especially without any notification, and it can lead to user frustration. And although we bought a subscription model where they said they would only add or delete twice a year, we're finding that every month a certain amount of titles are taken out of the package and a certain amount are added to the package. And if faculty have put them in their curriculum systems, they are wondering what happened to this title, and how can they get it back. Of course, the option to buy is there, but first you have to identify what the title is and what happened to it. Did it really get removed from the collection? And as I mentioned, course reserves is actually difficult to use in this environment because of the different types of restrictions. The buying patterns for us in 2016 were, the number of ebooks in 2016 were 508,599. Ebook usage in 2016, 688,978, of which 21% is a mix of approval and firm orders from COOTS, and 15% from ebook aggregator subscriptions, 1% from ebook aggregators purchased. The remaining 62% represent ebook collections, ebook packaged with databases, or purchased in conjunction with e-journal negotiations. These statistics do not include the heavy use of HathiTrust as well. And in 2015, we purchased about 9,000 print titles and in 2016 about 4,500 print titles. We monitor print usage, and we can easily say that the usage has gone down tremendously, and people, not that they prefer using print, but it's easy access and it's in our discovery tools, and so they are using print, and they've adjusted to this new environment. Some other significant changes are that we moved ILL operations into collection services or collection development, under the umbrella of the collection development. Evaluating ILL and considering other methods for acquiring access in conjunction with consortia, where as we think about the profiles of approval plans and the tools that developed approval plans were really quite good. I mean, the idea that you could design a plan where you had specific considerations per discipline, and then you could meet the needs per discipline, was actually a way of getting almost everything you needed on, for an institution that had a broad spectrum of curriculums that they had to support. What would be interesting to see is to have that type of profiling for a consortia, but have different schools meet different needs and then share in the resources that are purchased. I don't know if it's been done in the past, but it's something that we're looking into for the future. The other thing that we are looking at now is considering a pilot for chapter purchasing and possibly conducting short interviews with faculty to determine what is actually needed. Because this came from one faculty member asking for a particular book, and we weren't able to get a book with the amount of usage that they needed, with the amount of exposure that they needed for their class. And they were desperate, and we asked them to tell us whether they were going to use the whole book or were there particular chapters that they needed. It turned out that they needed chapters. We were actually able to buy those chapters, and there were no restrictions on its use either. They were able to add them to their curriculum, their course pack, and they were able to share it with their entire class. So we've considered this as a type of reference interview, where when something is requested, we interview the faculty or the library liaison to find out what exactly they need and how we could possibly get that. And are there industries, or industries in particular, that could supply that particular need without having to buy an entire book. So that's something on the forefront. What we are seeing across our consortia are desires for collaborative collection development. It's existed for many, many years, but it really has never developed into a very prominent method for acquiring material. Developments in digital collections have helped to look at new opportunities for consortia and other domain-specific groups to expand collaborative collection development efforts. Google Books and the HathiTrust Digital Library have broadened the definition of collaborative collection development to move beyond ownership. And that's from a BTAA library conference that I attended. It was the theme of that conference to see how we could use ILL to form a profile for a consortia, because we are lending as a consortia, and borrowing as a consortia. So a lot of what is needed is in the evidence of ILL. And so we're hoping to evaluate that and then see if we can develop some kinds of profiles and how we can continue in that vein. We're working with PALC and BTAA for ideas that lead to these designs for collaborative collection development, and we feel very strongly that vendors and publishers can play a significant role in helping to design and initiate these developments. Yeah, and I think that's all I have, so thank you for listening. Okay.
Thanks, Grace Mary, Steve, Trish. Thanks to all of you for spending your lunchtime with us. There is time for questions, if any of you have questions or comments. Yes, please.
Thank you all. That was pretty amazing. Great to hear these theories and strategies. I'm concerned, I have a question about when your firm orders decreased. I think this is going to Alberta. I have faculty who are very concerned that our firm orders would always cover their needs. And so are you finding that because of your change strategies, you're getting what they need anyway, and they don't have to feel that they have to place those firm orders?
I think it's a bit of a mix. In a lot of cases, we find the firm orders we're receiving are items that we will be getting on approval. They just haven't been released yet. So we're monitoring that as part of it. A lot of the firm orders that are being placed are for material that was published prior to our approval plans being implemented. So we're getting firm orders for the old stuff and the forthcoming stuff, and some of that forthcoming material would be coming. So,
Okay, because I know that my faculty is really concerned that our approval plan, if it doesn't bring in what they need, that they can always rely on their, being able to select.
Right.
In a sense. And so, as I think one of you also did, you're not really doing librarian selection. You're allowing the faculty to fill in the gaps if they have those areas that they need. Also, Steve, you said something about the scholarly record, and you said the DDA plans aren't really going to address the scholarly record needs. And what was your suggestion that you said would?
The job of preserving the monographic scholarly record will be essentially done at a consortial level. There will be groups that will come together and decide that we need to preserve the record, and they will act collaboratively to do that. There's nobody out there now who's got the money enough to become and build collections of record. That's done. Even places like Harvard have come to the realization that they're not going to be able to buy and preserve the stuff that they used to be able to do, 10, 15 years ago. The amount of publishing has expanded, budgets have not. So consequently, it's going to be a group effort that preserves the scholarly record, and you won't be able to rely upon, bigger players to be essentially collections of record. Even Library of Congress has admitted you can't do it anymore.
Right. So we have a lot of work to do on that front.
Yes.
Okay.
And to address your issue about firm orders, maybe this wasn't emphasized, but we're actually exposing a lot more content to our users and providing fairly immediate access to it than we did through previous approval plans. We basically took the entire approval profile for both slips and books and turned that into the DDA thing. So we're essentially, we've doubled the amount of content that's actually available on an ongoing basis for people to see and use. So consequently, we have reduced the need for firm order to fill in the blank, but the firm order programs are still there. Faculty, in fact, it's kind of streamlined. It's, faculty order it, we order it.
Yep. Okay, and then one other thing. You mentioned that you're a net borrower in Alberta now. That's a very interesting consequence. Yeah. I don't suppose that has happened to the other two on the panel?
No.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch that. Thank you all.
So we have a very large approval plan, very much still.
I should ask people to introduce themselves.
I'm Chris Palazzola. I'm head of collections at Emory in
And?
Atlanta.
Thank you.
And so we are still a very large one. We're doing a lot of review now of our print collections because of space needs. Just a lot of what has been leading to a lot of your decisions as well. One thing we're doing is a lot of analysis, and methodology is extremely important. It's more of a comment than kind of a question. So there's a lot of comparisons that are being done by, print use versus e-use and so on. But it's It's very tricky to do that very well. I mean, we can have counter statistics, you have other things of that sort. But really, when we don't have if there's not a lot of duplication per se, it's very difficult to see whether one would choose a print book versus an ebook, particularly when the only option they have is an ebook. That might be why some of that use is going up. And of course, we can't duplicate all that we're doing either. So my comment more is to say that I think we have to be very careful when we're doing comparisons of e-use versus print use. If we're talking about initial circulations versus how many times a book could get used 4 or 5 times as an ebook, because it can be used by more than one person, obviously not checked out, and not in the hands of someone else. So obviously that use will go up. So I think there's some basic methodologies that have to be addressed before we make a comparison to say we only have 6,000 uses of this print book, but then 12,000. Is that more than one use of that ebook, or is that a single use of that ebook? And is that enough of a return on investment for a print book, just one use over 10 years, let's say? Or is it there need to be more than once for an ebook to really show its use, or is one time a good use as well? Are we counting chapters? Are we counting the things? So there's all those kind of questions I say. So whenever I see kind of statistics saying, there's a great, increase in use, I'm like, well, you don't even have that many ebooks, but yeah, you have a lot more use. So it's more than one use per ebook, but are you doing the same thing for a print book and seeing how many times it got circulated, if it's just once or not? So we're just struggling with some of this stuff right now. So the only reason why I'm bringing it up, because it's very close to what I'm working on right now in terms of looking at our ebooks and our print books. If anyone has any other thoughts on it, sure, of course.
Yeah, well, what I failed to mention was that there is another driving force, and that is space.
Of course.
Right. And so we are being asked to provide space in every one of our libraries and to remove a large percentage of our monographs. And I think that's happening in many locations.
Happening with us. One of the reasons why we're doing it right now, all this analysis.
So off-campus, shelving for this material puts it at a deeper disadvantage, because it has to be delivered just like other, ILLs and so forth.
Of course,
Right.
of course.
Right. So I think that's also a driving force. And I agree with you. We really don't know what the use stands for. I mean, is it a chapter use? Is it the whole book? But we also don't know what the person really needs. I mean, and that's something that I think we could say across the board for almost everything.
Yeah.
Journal uses, statistics, we don't really know how things are used. And I think it's something that we could study further, actually.
Yeah, in print books, you never knew what they did after they got the print book. I mean, really, after they checked it out. But at least with ebooks, some places you get chapter downloads and the number of times they viewed it. So there are some advantages, definitely, in those cases.
Like, I don't think there was a previous program where they talked about 42% of the material that had never been used. And I think that you can't dispute that.
Yeah.
They've never been used. Right?
No, I
Right.
think I just never get used in any way for exactly.
Right.
Thank you.
Who else wants to talk about their usage or anything else? I guess we're done. Thank you very much for attending our session.